All right. I want to talk about getting stronger. So, this more specifically, I want to talk about pathways of communication to an athlete. And I want to break down kind of, you know, how do we communicate most efficiently um, the style and the intent and the intensity and the durations uh, in a program to an athlete. How do we convey that? Um, there's lots of different ways. There's programs that are written just straight percentages. There's programs with RIR, reps in reserve, RPE, just a basic scale of 1 to 10 and how hard did you exert yourself, and then a couple years ago, Ben and I actually started playing around with combining some of that. So we actually did 2 sets of RPE and averaged that score and to be the true score. And what that was is what the athlete felt the exertion was combined with what the coach thought the exertion looked like. And then we had a scale of 7 to 10, and it would work really well for strength movements within that, especially for partner and group style training, or just for people who resonate really well with the RPE system, and want kind of like an accurate second opinion where you're both talking about the same thing and you're not really on 2 different scales. So then I took that and I started playing around with a load range, a percentage, an RPE, and an RIR, and then a description. And it's not all the time. Actually, very rarely are all. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of those. It's pretty rare that all 5 of those are filled out. That's kind of overkill on information, but the idea behind it is to more accurately convey the intent and the intensity of the training, right? Because RPE can change, your percentages can change, right? Like if we're on a program for long enough, eventually you need to add something to the estimated max that you're calculating from, because those percentages need to come up. Eventually, you know, your RP8 weights are going to be RP7s and then hopefully RP6s, and it's very easy to get stuck in a mental routine of, oh, well, that number is usually an RP8, and then you kind of have a roadblock and you stay there because that number is RP8, and it's hard to move past that. Same thing with RIR. And then load range as well. I think that one can change a lot too. I think, you can have an athlete be in this range and they're chipping away at those bottom numbers, trying to fill out the top end of that range, and you can just continue to put that range in there week after week after week, as long as they don't get frustrated with seeing that, and as long as they're not overshooters or overachievers or whatever, and so they're always aiming for that top end. But if they can fluctuate, no problem, just hang out in that range and just go up and down, it's going to be the same thing as any other wave progression. So finding which one of those and which combinations of those speak to your athlete the most accurately is very important, I think, and that's what I wanted to talk about, because I don't think, really, I kind of want this to be a little bit of an instructional on how to read this, because I had a question from an athlete where I kind of realized, like, oh, you're not even looking at these other columns. You're looking at one column and fixating on that, and then you're upset when you can't fall within that every single time. And that's a lot on me, because I need to educate on what these other columns mean and what they're there for. And that's the purpose of this video. But we're essentially averaging all of those things, and then that is the idea of how I want you to train. So if, for example, in this specific case, he had a load range that under normal circumstances wouldn't have been challenging. It was his normal workload, but that's fresh. And I had put 2 movements in front of that to pre-fatigue that third movement that we're working on. In this case, it was the log press. So I had some overhead press work and some things, some pump stuff in place beforehand, so that he's in the middle of his workout by the time you get to that log press, and it can be pretty draining. So the load range I kept as what he would be doing if he was fresh, but that would be with an RPE of like 8 to 9, and I dropped the RPE down to like a 5 and a 6, but I kept that load range the same, because really what I'm trying to see is, okay, yeah, sure, if you can maintain that load range while we add this stuff on top, that's great. You're only going to grow. But I do expect it to come down. So what I was wanting him to do, and after we've discussed this, it was very clear, and he's actually excited to go back and kind of reformulate some of this stuff. But we're trying to, where's the middle ground here? So what am I trying to say when I say a 5 to 6 RPE? Well, if you know anything about me and you've been following me, you know that when I am, and I guess I should clarify this, but the VASP scale of 7 to 10 is really only useful. The reason why we use 7 to 10 is because we are only using it to communicate about lifts where we're trying to stimulate maximum strength, where we are over 65, 70% and 80% even, and we are well into that heavy range, right? The heavy lifting territory. If it's an RPE 6, it's not heavy for you. It's not worth talking about in that way. That's not accurate information. So when I say 5 to 6, what does that mean? Well, it means under a 7. And that sounds stupid, but what is a 7? If 7 is the beginning of where our strength work begins, then under that is going to be several things. It's not going to be heavy lifting. It's going to be skill acquisition. It's going to be hypertrophy, or it's going to be speed work, right? Or a combination of those in some way. If you see something, whether it's percentage, and the reason I didn't pick percentage for this is because we haven't tested in a while. We don't really have enough information. If I were to say that in percentage, it would be like a 15% range. It would be like 50 to 65%. Well, what the fuck? That's even more vague, in my opinion. So a 5 or 6 RPE, I want him to think, okay, well, this is the load range, but this is the RPE. I need to respect the RPE. And so that might make the load range come down, which is perfectly fine as long as the intent is getting hit first. If you are struggling too much in the prescribed weight range and it is over the RPE range, then you're not even stimulating what I'm trying to get you to stimulate for that particular movement in the program. So